Well, I'm joined today with Kieran Bohan, who is Kieran, what is in fact your official job title here in terms of
Well,
Table?
so I have the privilege of being the Open Table Network Coordinator. So Open Table has become a network over the last 5 years. We're about to celebrate our anniversary next month. Open Table is a network of ecumenical Christian worship communities which offer a warm welcome to Christians who are lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, queer or questioning, intersex, and asexual, or LGBTQIA for short. So I'll use the acronym from now on just to save time. But it's not just for members of our communities, it's also for all who seek an inclusive church. So we've also seen people come to Open Table for other reasons where they felt marginalized, such as divorce, homelessness and mental distress, for example.
And so on a sort of day-by-day basis, what do you do as a network?
Well, it's Open Table communities are hosted by local churches. Currently, there are 16 Open Table communities across England and Wales, hosted by churches in 4 different denominations. The average Open Table community meets once a month for a communion service. They may do other activities as well, but it is centered around the central act of hospitality of our faith, which is communion. And so the first Open Table community began in Liverpool in June 2008. And the reason we chose to gather around the communion table is because it is the central aspect of hospitality of our faith, and many in our communities have felt excluded from that, either because they have been refused communion or because they feared being refused if the minister knows who they are and so on. So we've been meeting in Liverpool for almost 12 years, and then in summer 2015, the Open Table family began to grow. As I say, we've now got 16 communities across England and Wales, and more to come. We've had more than 90 other churches get in touch with us to explore how to make their church more inclusive and whether hosting an Open Table community is right for their context. So it began as a ministry of outreach to the LGBTQIA+ community from the parish which hosts the first community in Liverpool. And we're now in the process of becoming an independent charity to sustain and develop the good work that God's begun in us, in Jesus' name. So we hope to have more news of that soon. And we're having an event to celebrate our anniversary, 12 years of the first community and 5 years as a network next month. So more of that later, perhaps.
So Malvern Link with Cowley, we've been committed to being an inclusive church. We're members of the Inclusive Church Network. And that's a journey that the parish has been on for quite a while. I mean, I've only been here for 2 years, but it's been happening from before I came here, but we've continued that commitment. What does an inclusive church look like?
Well, I've had the privilege of talking to over 90 churches now about their journey towards inclusion and whether Open Table is part of that. And I can see that many churches sincerely believe they are inviting, welcoming and inclusive. And it might be true for most people they meet, but that understanding of what it means to be inclusive is tested by the way we reach out to those who are not like us. There's a resource that I find helpful to share to illustrate this, which is from the educational charity Inclusive Church. It gives a really helpful example of this. It's called the Radical Welcome Course, and it's designed for church communities to reflect on over 4 weeks. The important thing to say is that Inclusive Church's work is not just about gender identity or sexual orientation either. It's about reflecting on our attitudes to all of those who are in the minority or on the margins of our communities. So it demonstrates the journey from inviting to inclusion and radical welcome. So a church with an inviting culture could simply be saying, come and be like us. So if you fit in, you can stay. And that's fine as far as it goes. But if your situation or your behavior doesn't meet the standard, then maybe you're no longer welcome. A church who's seeking to be more inclusive might say, help us to be diverse, which is good as far as it goes. But again, the focus is on us. the majority who get to decide who's in and who's out. So communities which aspire to radical welcome, as this resource shows, may say, bring your culture, your voice, your whole self. We want to engage in truly mutual relationship.
Mm.
So that means it's no longer about us as the majority group, but us as a community truly open to learning from each other and growing together. So that, I believe, is the aspiration of an inclusive church. And easier said than done, and it's something that requires continually being worked towards.
We've started playing around, similar, I think, to what you're saying there, that we felt a little bit that inclusion does still feel a bit paternalistic, as if you're graciously offering the opportunity for people to come and be with you, and by making your buildings more inclusive or accessible,
yes,
you're still saying, there's still a kind of aren't we generous act to it. And
yes.
actually, we started playing around with the word belonging. That instead of wanting to be inclusive, we want to be a place where people can belong. Because if you walked into a space and felt you belonged there, it's yours. It's yours,
yes, exactly.
right from the beginning. You've just come home. That's all it is.
That's a really good example of what that radical welcome culture is about. It's about coming together to the table as equals and being respected as we are and called to be our best selves with God's help, really.
Yeah.
So I think it's good for a community to reflect on where it is on this journey and to be honest about that. So if a church would welcome someone from the LGBTQIA+ community only if they're not in a relationship, for example, better to be clear about that from the start than to welcome someone in and then reject them later if they bring a partner or ask about marriage.
Yeah.
And so we encourage churches who are thinking about hosting an open table community to register as an inclusive church. So that shows their commitment to these values and also to make their intentions visible. So if if my husband and I are visiting a new area, we'll often look at the Inclusive Church website to see if there's a member church there where we know we'll be welcome.
Yeah.
And it's also really important to communicate your intentions to be an inclusive church or a church with radical welcome. So there's a tragic story of a church in Manchester which felt it was inclusive, but they hadn't clearly communicated it. And they had a teenage girl in that community who was struggling with her sexuality, who ultimately took her own life because she didn't feel able to be open about herself in that community. And that community was devastated, and they've been on a tremendous journey of healing and reconciliation, and have become more openly inclusive and radically welcoming as a result. It's only a shame that they hadn't communicated their intentions sooner, because it might just have saved her life.
Well, I suppose my frustration in that area is that I encounter a lot of other church leaders or church communities who actually do have very strong opinions on particular aspects of inclusivity. But if you try to see from their websites or from their publicity what they actually think, you wouldn't know that. So you and I have been friends for a while, so you know that I have a physical disability, and I don't want to go into a space where I discover that actually the leadership really do fervently believe that disability is the cause of unaccounted for sin.
Absolutely.
I want to be able to know, a bit like you, I look at the Inclusive Church website as well. I want to know that I'm going to be able to go into a space where that's not going to be an issue.
Absolutely.
And although I can point at various incidents, where I was secretly healed at one church, which in the sense of I turned around and discovered 3 people, essentially fervently praying for me behind my back. But they were praying for me to not be disabled, and I don't want to end up in those places. It ranges from awkward to incredibly dangerous. So I find it disingenuous, that sense of not actually saying, well, do you know what? At the moment, this is what this is where we are, because I think that
Absolutely.
I think you're right that actually going into those places and discovering, that you're not actually fully welcome, is worse than not going in the first place.
Absolutely, because then the harm that can be done through that can disconnect someone from their faith and spirituality. So probably at least 50% of the people who come to open table communities are what the Fresh Expressions movement calls de-churched. So that they've had some kind of experience of church which has led them to believe they're not welcome there, that they don't belong.
Yeah.
So a huge part of our ministry is about enabling people to say that they are beloved children of God who have just as much right to be in church as anyone else.
Yeah.
And no one else except God has the right to be the judge of that, really.
Yeah.
It's not about judgment in the sense of, you're out and I'm in. It's about justice. So we believe that this is a social justice issue.
Yeah.
I think that as the law around LGBT inclusion has changed so radically over the last 15 years or so, legal social attitudes have changed dramatically, but the churches have tended to lag behind on this and have found it hard to engage in debate which many people seem to think is settled. So I was invited to take part in a panel discussion on marriage a few years ago, and hardly anyone came because most people there seem to think that the issue is settled. Civil partnerships have been legal since 2005, same-sex marriage since 2014 in England and Wales. So the majority seem to think the issue is settled. So there was even among church folk, there was a survey published in February this year that said only a third of English Anglicans now believe same-sex marriage is wrong. So there does appear to be a disconnect there. And our churches are still working this out in a way that's already happens legally and socially. We had an interesting kind of side effect of this at St. Bride's in Liverpool, which is the church which hosts the first open table community. So obviously, as an Anglican church, we can't register civil partnerships and marriage because Anglican churches are prohibited in English law. But by promoting the fact that we're an inclusive church and that we host this ministry to the LGBTQIA+ community, we've actually seen an unintended impact of this. So the marriage ministry of St. Bride's has, within 4 years, grown by over 300%.
Wow.
Because when bookings were made, the vicar heard couples say things like, we wanted to come to an inclusive church for our wedding. Several of our guests are in same-sex relationships, and we wanted to be in a church where they would feel affirmed too. So at the time, the rector reflected that rather than taking away from traditional marriage, he believed that being inclusive of the LGBTQIA+ community has added something to it. And as I've said, so the majority of open table communities are hosted in Anglican churches, but some are hosted in other denominations. So we have the United Reformed Church, the Methodist Church, and the Baptist Church as well. So the URC churches in our congregations, in our communities, have made a commitment to host same-sex marriages, and the Methodist Church that hosts open table in our network intends to do so as soon as their governing body allows them to do so. So some of our partners are showing the way of what can be possible.
Yeah. In terms of that, the issues around openness, about communities, clarifying who they are and exploring who they are, what, in your opinion, what do you think people who don't go to church think churches are like in terms of inclusivity, and particularly in their attitudes towards LGBTQIA issues?
Well, I think the impression I get is that people who aren't involved in church can't understand why anyone who's LGBT would want to be involved in church at all. That's quite a common thing. I mean, to the point where people have said to me, "Why do you stay? Isn't it a bit like being in an abusive relationship?"
Mm.
And I've struggled with that, because I can see why they say that, but that's not, you know, I believe there's something more going on. I believe that it's possible for people like myself to be part of the change we want to see, because I love the church and I love God enough to believe that this can be better.
Mm.
But it can be an inhospitable place to be at times. You know, because for those of us who are presenting a minority report on gender identity and sexual orientation, we don't always feel like we're made welcome. We don't always feel like we've got an equal platform to speak.
Mm.
I mean, Philip, you and I met on a course last year, which was open to Christians from many traditions, in peacemaking and reconciliation, and it was a beautiful thing that we've come together from so many different places. But I genuinely felt at the beginning of that I didn't know if I would be able to speak freely in that forum.
Yeah.
And that's not, I'm much more confident about where I'm coming from now, but I still can't take it for granted that I, as an LGBT Christian, and a confident one, I'm going to be welcome. So for the wider LGBT community in particular, looking at the church, there's a lot of hurt, there's a lot of anger, there's a lot of confusion about why we would want to have anything to do with the church. We have been part of building bridges there, though. So there is a movement called Christians at Pride, which invites not just LGBT Christians, but Christians who wish to show the love of God within and for our community, walk at Pride marches.
Yeah.
And we've done so in Liverpool in recent years, and we've had over 100 Christians from the LGBTQIA plus community and from churches which are supportive. Yeah. And for the most part, that's been hugely warmly welcomed. It's really important for us to show that there is more than one Christian voice on this issue. There is a group called Christian Voice which protests at Pride marches, and they've probably been to more Pride marches than the average queer person, which I find deeply funny and sad all at the same time.
Absolutely.
But it's really important for us to show that there is a range of voices on this issue, as there is on divorce and other issues within the Christian community.
Which at the heart of it is kind of what Anglicanism is fundamentally about in one sense. It's not about having a single view. It's about having a very broad and wide church.
Indeed. And there is a precedent there. I mean, if I might use the example of divorce again.
Yep.
So my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, Philip, but my understanding is that if a vicar doesn't wish to marry a couple where one of them has been divorced, then you have the freedom of conscience not to do so.
Yep.
But you have a responsibility as a parish priest to find someone who will.
Yeah.
So
and that was the deal that General Synod did. And you know, there are people if you read that debate in General Synod, there were people who vehemently opposed the relaxation of the rule about divorcees, and felt that, you know, that you could not get divorced, you could not be remarried, simple as that. But the deal was done because there was an equal group of people who felt that actually you could do that, and there were ways of making that work. And so it was then let down to the incumbent's conscience.
Yes.
And I suspect that, I mean, the Campaign for Equal Marriage in the Church of England, that's essentially their argument, which is that we found a way of doing this the last time we came up with a difficult problem, and we can probably use the same solution to get through this particular one.
However, that's also my view.
Yeah. However, coming back to our earlier point, that really does require people to be very open and very specific about what their view is. And now, you know, when that came out, churches didn't have websites, you didn't have that kind of thing. But most people now get their information from the church over the web, from a website or from social media. So the more churches can be explicitly clear, the better, I think.
Absolutely. And given that there is the precedent of freedom of conscience, it would seem just to apply it in this context as well.
So how do people find out more about Open Table? Also, how do people support it? Because, you know, this is a ministry which is really key. I suspect you're not receiving any major funding from the Church of England. So, you know,
No, that's correct.
you know, how do people find out more and get involved?
Well, our website is opentable.lgbt. That's opentable.lgbt. So at the moment, it's just a single page, but it does list all the communities across England and Wales that currently meet. It does also give details of how to make a financial donation. We are inviting people to pray for what we do, that it's not our kingdom we're building. You know, we believe that this is, the Spirit is moving in this, and we invite those who maybe can't be as open as I've been felt called to be, to pray for what we do, and to maybe reflect on whether something like this, Open Table or some other ministry, might be appropriate in their context.
Yeah.
We're also, if you search for Open Table Network on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, you're welcome to follow us and engage with us on those platforms as well.
Well, we'll put all the links we can on our Facebook page along with this video, and put some stuff up about the website as well.
And as many folk are in these extraordinary times, we've also been embracing video a lot more. So we have had some recent Open Table services and reflections posted on our YouTube channel as well. So it'd be good to share that as well.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Kieran. That was absolutely brilliant. And you know, we're in the early stages of exploring whether Open Table would be the right thing for us in Morven. You know, we feel quite strongly called to that. You know, we were expecting to be in Pride in Morven this year, but obviously we've been somewhat scuppered by the coronavirus, but I'm sure we'll come back strongly next year. Anyway, so thank you so much for talking to us today, and best of luck, and we'll keep you in our prayers.
Bless you. Thank you very much indeed.
Cheers. God bless.
Bye-bye.